Every story begins with a truth and ends with a heartbeat. I'm Tisha, and I have a story to tell. So kick off your shoes, settle in, and let's begin.
The overhead bin clicked shut with a finality that matched Phoebe Taylor's mood. She'd wedged her carry-on, a battered black roller bag that had seen better days, into the last available space in row 23, squeezed between a designer purse and what appeared to be someone's entire winter wardrobe compressed into a duffel bag. The flight from Seattle to Boston had been delayed twice, rerouted once, and now, 5 hours later than scheduled, she was finally settling into her middle seat with the kind of exhausted resignation that comes from a day where absolutely everything has gone wrong. Outside the small oval window, November rain pelted the tarmac. Inside, the cabin smelled like a mixture of human breath and the perfume of the woman in 23A who had apparently bathed in it. Phoebe closed her eyes and tried to remember why she'd thought flying across the country for a job interview was a good idea. The position at Brooks and Hamilton Publishing had seemed like a dream when the recruiter first called. Senior editor, literary fiction, a corner office overlooking Boston Common. Everything she'd worked towards since graduating with her English degree 8 years ago. But that was before her cat got sick, before her roommate announced she was moving out, and before her mother called with that particular tone in her voice that meant bad news was coming. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been cleared for takeoff. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. Phoebe fastened her seatbelt and pulled out her phone, switching it to airplane mode. One last check of her messages. Nothing from her mother. Good. That meant her father's test results hadn't come back yet. A text from her best friend Andi. You've got this. Boston won't know what hit them, and an email from the recruiter confirming her interview time, 9 a.m. sharp, don't be late. She wouldn't be late. She was never late. Phoebe Taylor was punctual, prepared, and professional, the 3 Ps that had gotten her through college, through 3 publishing internships, through the grinding reality of New York's editorial trenches, where she'd spent the last 5 years reading slush piles and fetching coffee for editors who barely remembered her name. This interview would be different. It had to be. The plane began its taxi down the runway, and Phoebe gripped the armrests. She'd never been a nervous flyer, but something about today felt off-kilter, like the universe itself was slightly misaligned. The woman next to her was already asleep, mouth slightly open, head tilted at an angle that would definitely result in neck pain. Across the aisle, a man in his 30s was typing furiously on his laptop, racing against the imminent, "Please turn off all electronic devices" announcement. The engines roared. The plane accelerated, and then they were airborne, climbing through the grey Seattle clouds into a sky that was somehow even greyer above them. Phoebe watched the city shrink below, the Space Needle becoming a toy, the streets turning into neat grids, the water of Puget Sound spreading out like hammered steel. She pulled out the folder containing her interview materials. Her resume, printed on expensive cream-colored paper. Her portfolio of edited manuscripts, the before and after versions showing how she'd transformed rambling first drafts into publishable prose. Letters of recommendation from authors she'd worked with, praising her insight, her patience, her ability to see what a story could become. But as she reviewed the documents, a hollow feeling opened in her chest. On paper, she looked perfect. In reality, she was exhausted, underpaid, and increasingly unsure whether the dream she'd been chasing for 8 years was actually her dream at all. When had reading stopped being a joy and started being work? When had she started skimming manuscripts instead of savoring them, looking for reasons to reject rather than reasons to believe? When had the words on the page begun to blur together into one long, endless story about people making mistakes and learning lessons and finding love and losing love and finding it again? Phoebe closed the folder and shoved it back into the seat pocket. She'd read it all 100 times. One more review wouldn't make her any more qualified or any less tired. The flight attendant came by with drinks. Phoebe ordered coffee, black, and immediately regretted it when she took the first sip. It tasted like it had been brewed during the Carter administration. She drank it anyway. She'd need the caffeine to stay awake for the layover in Denver. Layover. She'd forgotten about the layover. 2 hours in Denver's airport, probably spent charging her phone at one of those communal charging stations while eating an overpriced sandwich and trying not to think about her father's test results or her dwindling bank account, or the fact that her last relationship had ended 6 months ago when Jeremy announced he was finding himself in Thailand and probably wouldn't be back. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, the flight attendant was announcing their descent into Denver. Phoebe's neck ached from the angle she'd been sleeping at, and there was a small puddle of drool on her shoulder. Excellent. Professional, prepared, and now slightly damp. The landing was rough. The plane bounced twice before settling onto the runway with a squeal of tires. The woman next to Phoebe woke with a start, looked around in confusion, then immediately pulled out her phone. All around the cabin, devices were emerging from pockets and bags, screens lighting up like small rectangular stars. Phoebe checked her phone, a missed call from her mother. Her heart sank. She'd call back from the airport. The plane taxied to the gate with agonizing slowness. She gathered her belongings, her purse, her jacket, the paperback novel she'd been meaning to read for 3 months. She stood when the seatbelt sign dinged off, joining the shuffle of passengers all trying to retrieve their luggage at once. She opened the overhead bin. Her black roller bag was right where she'd left it, though it had shifted slightly during the flight. She grabbed the handle and pulled, wrangling it down past the designer purse and the winter duffel. It felt heavier than she remembered. But then again, she'd packed for 3 days in Boston. Interview clothes, backup interview clothes, emergency interview clothes, plus a week's worth of underwear because her mother had always taught her to be prepared for disasters. Phoebe extended the handle and began making her way up the aisle, joining the slow procession toward the exit. The flight attendants smiled their practiced smiles. "Thank you for flying with us. Have a great day in Denver." Denver was grey too. Grey and cold, the kind of November afternoon that couldn't decide whether to snow or just threaten to. Phoebe checked the departure boards. Her connecting flight to Boston was on time, departing from gate B17. She was currently at gate A42. She grabbed a sandwich from a kiosk, turkey and Swiss on wheat, the universal language of airport food, and found a seat near a charging station. While her phone recharged, she called her mother. "Phoebe, honey." Her mother's voice was carefully neutral, which was never a good sign. "Did you land?" "I'm in Denver. Connecting flight is in about an hour. What did the doctor say?" There was a long pause. "They want to run more tests. It's probably nothing, but they found some abnormalities in the blood work." Phoebe closed her eyes. "What kind of abnormalities?" "The kind that require more tests." Her mother's voice was firm now, the tone she used when she didn't want to discuss something further. "You focus on your interview. Your father and I will handle this." "Mom!" "Phoebe, focus on your interview. We'll talk when you get back." They said their goodbyes, and Phoebe sat staring at her phone for a long moment. Abnormalities. More tests. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to grasp, but impossible to ignore. She forced herself to eat the sandwich. It tasted like cardboard, but she chewed mechanically, washing it down with a bottle of water that cost $5. Airport prices were designed to make you feel violated. When her flight was called, she stood, shouldered her purse, grabbed her roller bag, and joined the line of tired travelers shuffling toward gate B17. The flight to Boston would be another 4 hours. She'd sleep, or try to. She'd arrive at 11 p.m. local time, grab a cab to her hotel, set 3 alarms for 6 a.m., and wake up ready to convince Brooks and Hamilton Publishing that she was exactly the editor they'd been looking for. The universe might be misaligned, but Phoebe Taylor was still punctual, prepared, and professional. She'd figure out the rest later. The thing about flying across the country is that it gives you too much time to think. Phoebe spent the flight from Denver to Boston staring out the window at the darkness below, watching the occasional constellation of cities pass beneath them like fallen stars. She tried to read her book, she tried to sleep, she tried to stop thinking about her father's test results, her dwindling savings account, the fact that she was 30 years old and still didn't know what she wanted to be when she grew up. Nothing worked. Her mind kept spinning, cycling through worst-case scenarios and best-case scenarios and all the mediocre scenarios in between. By the time the plane began its descent into Boston, she felt wrung out and hollowed out, like someone had taken a spoon and scraped away everything except her anxiety. Logan Airport at 11 p.m. was surprisingly busy. Families reuniting, business travelers with their roller bags and their tired faces, college students heading home for Thanksgiving break. Phoebe waited at baggage claim for her checked bag. She'd packed too much for just a carry-on, watching the carousel spin around and around with its hypnotic rhythm. Her bag appeared, another black roller bag, this one larger than the carry-on with a bright yellow luggage tag that Andi had given her as a joke. "So you can spot it easily," Andi had said. "Yellow like sunshine, like optimism." Phoebe grabbed it and headed for the taxi stand, pulling both bags behind her. The carry-on's wheel was starting to stick. She'd need to replace it soon, add it to the long list of things she needed to do but couldn't quite afford. The hotel was in Cambridge, a small boutique place near Harvard Square that the recruiter had recommended. "Close to the office," she'd said, "and it has character." Character, Phoebe had learned, was code for small and expensive, but with good lighting for Instagram. She checked in, rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, found her room, and immediately collapsed on the bed without bothering to unpack. The interview was in 10 hours. She should review her materials. She should iron her suit and do all the things that punctual, prepared professional people do. Instead, she lay in the dark and thought about her father. He'd been an engineer, practical and precise, a man who fixed things for a living. When Phoebe was young, he used to take apart broken appliances just to show her how they worked. Toasters, radios, the ancient television in the garage. "Everything has a logic to it," he'd tell her. "You just have to find the pattern." But some things didn't have patterns. Some things were just chaos wearing a disguise. Phoebe set 3 alarms on her phone, 6 a.m., 6:10, and 6:20 a.m., and finally, sometime after midnight, fell into a fitful sleep, where she dreamed about overhead bins that wouldn't open, and planes that never landed, and interviews that stretched on forever with questions she couldn't answer. She woke to the sound of her first alarm, silenced it, then immediately fell back asleep until the 3rd alarm jolted her upright at 6:20. Not ideal, but she'd planned for this. Her interview suit was already laid out, her materials were organized, her shoes were polished. She showered, dried her hair, applied makeup with the precision of someone who didn't usually wear much makeup, but knew that interviews required it. The woman looking back at her from the mirror was professional, put together, ready. The woman behind the mirror was terrified. Phoebe shook her head, no time for that. She had an interview to ace. She grabbed her purse, her portfolio, her phone, her room key, double-checked everything, triple-checked, then headed for the door, pulling her carry-on behind her. She'd packed her interview materials in it, along with backup copies of everything, because being prepared meant being prepared for preparation itself to fail. The hotel lobby was quiet, just a few early risers getting coffee from the breakfast bar. Phoebe grabbed a banana and a coffee to go, then stepped outside into a Boston morning that was cold and crisp. The Brooks and Hamilton office was only a 10-minute walk. Phoebe had mapped it out the night before, 3 different routes in case one was blocked by construction or crowds or the unpredictable chaos of city streets. She took the main route, pulling her carry-on behind her, the sticky wheel making a rhythmic click-click-click that matched her heartbeat. The office was in a beautiful old brownstone on Beacon Hill. the kind of building that had probably housed Boston's elite in the 1800s and now housed their intellectual descendants. Phoebe climbed the steps, pulled open the heavy wooden door, and found herself in a lobby that was all exposed brick and hardwood floors and the musty, sweet smell of old books. A receptionist looked up from her desk. "Can I help you?" "Phoebe Taylor, I have a 9 a.m. interview with—" "Yes, of course. They're expecting you. 3rd floor, take the elevator to your left. Miss Brooks will meet you there." Phoebe nodded, managed a smile, and headed for the elevator. Her reflection in the brass doors showed a woman who looked calm, confident, and ready. She reached for her carry-on to retrieve her portfolio. That's when she noticed the sticker. A small round sticker on the side of the bag, right near the handle. It showed a cartoon puppy wearing sunglasses with the words, "Adopt, don't shop," in cheerful letters. Phoebe had never seen that sticker before in her life. Her heart stopped. She looked down at the bag, really looked at it for the first time that morning. Same black roller bag. Same style, same size. But the handle was a slightly different shade of grey, and there was a small scratch on the corner that she didn't remember, and when she checked the luggage tag, the name read, Gunnar Nelson, Denver, CO. This wasn't her bag. Phoebe stood frozen in the lobby, her mind racing through the logistics of what had happened. She'd grabbed the wrong bag from the overhead bin in Seattle. No, she'd grabbed it in Denver during the layover. She'd pulled down what she thought was her bag, but in her distracted state, worried about her father and her interview and everything else, she'd grabbed someone else's identical black roller bag. Which meant somewhere out there, Gunnar Nelson from Denver had her bag. Her interview materials, her backup interview clothes, her emergency interview clothes, her week's worth of underwear. The elevator dinged, the doors opened, and Phoebe realized that in approximately 30 seconds, she was supposed to be on the 3rd floor impressing Margaret Brooks with her professionalism, portfolio, and her carefully prepared responses to interview questions. Without her portfolio, without any of her materials, without anything except a banana, a coffee, and a stranger's luggage. The universe, it seemed, had taken misaligned as a personal challenge. Phoebe made a decision in the span of 3 seconds, the kind of snap judgment that would either save her interview or destroy it completely. She grabbed the handle of Gunnar Nelson's bag, stepped into the elevator, and pressed the button for the 3rd floor. As the doors closed, she unzipped the main compartment and started rummaging. She knew it was a violation of privacy. She knew it was borderline insane, but desperate times, desperate measures, and all that. Inside the bag were neatly folded clothes, men's, size medium, button-down shirts in blue and grey, a toiletry kit, a laptop charger, a dog-eared copy of The Between Cycle, and, thank you, universe, a leather portfolio containing what looked like architectural blueprints. Phoebe pulled out the portfolio and continued digging. At the very bottom of the bag, wrapped in a t-shirt, she found a framed photograph. A man in his early 30s, dark hair, warm smile, standing next to a golden retriever. The dog was wearing a birthday hat. The man was laughing. The elevator dinged again. 3rd floor. Phoebe shoved everything back into the bag, except the leather portfolio, which she tucked under her arm. Maybe if she held it at the right angle, it would look professional enough. Maybe no one would notice that the blueprints visible through the clear plastic sleeve were for a house renovation and not a book manuscript. The elevator doors opened. Standing in the hallway was a woman in her 50s, silver hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a grey suit. Margaret Brooks, managing editor, the woman who held Phoebe's future in her hands. "Phoebe Taylor," she extended her hand. "Margaret Brooks, so glad you could make it." Phoebe shook her hand, praying that her palm wasn't as sweaty as it felt. "Thank you so much for having me. Let's go to my office. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thank you." Phoebe followed Margaret down a hallway lined with framed book covers. Literary fiction mostly, the kind of serious award-winning novels that got reviewed in the New York Times and sold modestly and changed people's lives in quiet ways. This was where she wanted to work. This was the dream. Margaret's office was exactly what Phoebe had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk covered in manuscripts, a window overlooking Beacon Street with a view of the Commons' bare trees. Framed photos on the wall showed Margaret with various authors. Phoebe recognized at least 3 Pulitzer winners. "Please sit." Margaret settled into her chair and folded her hands on the desk. "I've been looking forward to this conversation. Your resume is impressive. 5 years at Whitman and Ross, work with some excellent authors. Tell me, what draws you to Brooks and Hamilton?" This was the easy question, the one Phoebe had prepared for. She launched into her answer, talking about the press's commitment to literary fiction, their track record with debut authors, the way they balanced commercial viability with artistic integrity. She was eloquent, passionate, genuine, all the things she'd practiced being. But as she spoke, part of her brain was spiraling. What happened when Margaret asked to see her portfolio? What happened when she asked for writing samples, for examples of her editorial work? Phoebe had nothing except a borrowed leather folder full of blueprints and a growing sense that this day was determined to break her. "That's wonderful," Margaret said when Phoebe finished. "It's clear you understand what we do here. Now, I'd love to see some examples of your editorial work. Manuscripts you've developed, before and after samples, that sort of thing." There it was. The moment of truth. Phoebe opened her mouth to explain, to apologize, to throw herself on Margaret's mercy when her phone rang. She'd forgotten to silence it. Rule number 1 of job interviews. And she'd forgotten. "I'm so sorry." Phoebe fumbled for her phone, ready to silence it without looking. But the name on the screen stopped her cold. Mom. Her mother never called during the day. Never. Not unless. "I need to take this," Phoebe said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "I'm sorry, it's my mother. It might be an emergency." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Of course, take it in the hallway." Phoebe practically ran from the office, answering the call as she pushed through the door. "Mom? Phoebe, honey." Her mother's voice was steady, but Phoebe could hear the tremor underneath. "Your father's in the hospital. They're running more tests, but they want to do them today. I know you have your interview, but I'm coming home." The words were out before Phoebe consciously made the decision. "I'll get on the next flight." "You don't have to. Mom, I'm coming home." She ended the call and stood in the hallway, breathing hard, trying to organize her thoughts. She needed to book a flight. She needed to get to the airport. She needed to apologize to Margaret Brooks for wasting her time. She needed her own luggage back. Phoebe pulled out her phone and checked the luggage tag on the bag, the one she'd barely glanced at in her panic that morning. There was a name, Gunnar Nelson, and phone number written beneath the address in neat handwriting. She dialed before she could overthink it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, "Hello?" A man's voice, warm and slightly confused. "Hi, is this Gunnar Nelson?" "Yes? Who's this?" "This is Phoebe Taylor. I think I have your luggage, and you probably have mine." There was a slight pause. Then he said, "The black roller bag from the Seattle flight." "Yes, I grabbed it by accident, and I just realized this morning, and I'm in Boston, but I need to get back to Seattle and—" Phoebe realized she was babbling and forced herself to stop. "Sorry, yes, I have your bag. I have yours too." He sounded amused now. "I was wondering when you'd notice. I called the airline, but they said these things usually have to work themselves out between passengers." "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. I can ship it to you. Or, actually," Gunnar said, "I'm in Boston too." Phoebe blinked. "You're what?" "I'm in Boston. I flew here yesterday. I'm here for a consultation on a renovation project. Where are you staying? The Charles Hotel in Cambridge, but I'm leaving today. I need to get home. My father. She stopped herself. This stranger didn't need her life story. I need to get to the airport as soon as possible. I can meet you at your hotel in 20 minutes, Gunnar said. We'll swap bags and you can catch your flight. Thank you so much. No problem, it's the least I can do, considering I've been using your toothbrush for the past 12 hours. Phoebe laughed despite herself. You didn't. I didn't, he confirmed. But I did read the first chapter of what looks like a manuscript in your bag. It's really good, by the way. The one about the lighthouse keeper. That's work. I'm an editor. Makes sense. You have excellent taste in reading material. He paused. 20 minutes at the Charles Hotel? I'll be in the lobby. Phoebe ended the call and went back into Margaret's office, where the older woman was reading something on her computer. She looked up when Phoebe entered. I'm so sorry, Phoebe said. There's a family emergency. I have to fly back to Seattle today. Margaret stood. Is everything all right? I hope so. My father's in the hospital. The words caught in her throat. I'm really sorry. I know this is unprofessional, and I was so excited about this opportunity. Phoebe. Margaret came around the desk and touched her shoulder. Family comes first, always. Let's reschedule when things settle down. Really? Really? You've clearly had a rough morning. Her eyes flicked to the architectural portfolio still clutched under Phoebe's arm. But what I've seen so far tells me you're exactly the kind of person we want on our team. Someone with priorities in the right place. Phoebe felt tears prickling at her eyes. Thank you. That means more than you know. Go take care of your father. Email me when you're ready to talk again. 20 minutes later, Phoebe was standing in the lobby of the Charles Hotel, both bags at her feet, hers and Gunnar Nelson's. She'd packed quickly, checked out even more quickly, and now she was refreshing her phone's flight booking app, looking for the next available flight to Seattle. The revolving door spun, and a man walked in. Dark hair, warm eyes, wearing jeans and a navy peacoat that had seen better days. He was carrying a black roller bag, Phoebe's black roller bag, with its bright yellow luggage tag, and next to him, trotting on a leash, was a golden retriever wearing a service dog vest. Phoebe! He smiled, and it was the same smile from the photograph in his bag, open and genuine. I'm Gunnar, and this is Buddy. The dog wagged his tail so hard his entire back half wagged with it. Phoebe found herself smiling, despite everything. Hi, thank you for this. I'm so sorry about the mix-up. These things happen. Gunnar set down her bag and picked up his. Especially with black roller bags. I've been thinking we should start a support group for people traumatized by identical luggage. I'd join that group. Phoebe knelt down to pet Buddy, who immediately pushed his head against her hand, seeking affection. He's beautiful. Is he yours? Yeah, he's a therapy dog. I bring him to children's hospitals, nursing homes, that kind of thing. I was actually visiting one yesterday. Phoebe looked up at Gunnar. There was something gentle about him, a kindness in his eyes that matched the way he'd responded to her panicked phone call. He could have been annoyed about the luggage mix-up. He could have complained or made this difficult. Instead, he'd come to meet her without hesitation. That's wonderful, she said. What you do with him, I mean. It's rewarding. Gunnar glanced at the luggage, then at Phoebe's face. Are you okay? You mentioned a family emergency. My father's in the hospital. I need to get back to Seattle. Phoebe stood, brushing dog hair off her pants. I was here for a job interview, but... She gestured vaguely. Life had other plans. I'm sorry, I hope he's all right. Me too. Phoebe checked her phone again. There's a flight in 3 hours. If I leave now, I can make it. Gunnar nodded. Do you need a ride to the airport? I have a rental car. Phoebe started to decline automatically. He'd already done enough. But then she looked at the bag exchange, at Buddy's happy face, at the genuine concern in Gunnar's expression, and something made her say, "Actually, that would be amazing, if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all. Buddy loves car rides." Gunnar picked up both his and her bags before she could protest. "Let's get you home." The drive to Logan Airport should have taken 20 minutes. In Boston traffic, at noon on a Tuesday, it took 45. Phoebe normally would have been stressed about the delay, calculating whether she'd make her flight, running through backup plans, but something about sitting in Gunnar's rental car, a sensible Honda CR-V with dog toys scattered in the back, made her relax slightly. Maybe it was Buddy, who'd claimed the entire back seat and was snoring gently. Maybe it was the way Gunnar navigated the traffic without cursing or honking, just accepting the delays with an easy patience. Or maybe it was the simple fact that for the first time all day, Phoebe wasn't alone with her anxiety. "So," Gunnar said, merging onto the highway, "editor in New York, interviewing in Boston, running away or running toward?" Phoebe laughed. "Is it that obvious? Just a guess. You have that look people get when they're trying to figure out if they're making a brave choice or a desperate one." "Both, I think." Phoebe watched the city slide past outside the window. "I've been at my current job for 5 years. It's fine. It's stable. But it's not what I thought it would be." "What did you think it would be?" "Magic, maybe?" "When I was in college, I used to stay up all night reading manuscripts from the slush pile at my internship. Most of them were terrible, but every once in a while I'd find something special. A story that made me forget I was sitting in a cramped office at 2 a.m., eating stale crackers. Those moments felt like discovering treasure." She paused, surprised at herself. She hadn't admitted this to anyone, not even Andi. "But now I'm reading with a checklist in my head. Will this sell? Will it fit our list? Can I explain it in 30 seconds at an acquisitions meeting? I'm not looking for magic anymore, I'm looking for marketability." Gunnar nodded slowly. "That's like what happened to me with architecture." "You're an architect." "Was. I don't know anymore." He smiled ruefully. "I spent 5 years at a firm in Denver designing office buildings and strip malls. Technically proficient, utterly soulless. I kept telling myself I was paying my dues, that eventually I'd get to design something meaningful, but the meaningful projects never came." "So, what did you do?" "I quit. Started my own practice focusing on residential renovation, helping people transform their houses into homes. It pays less, and I don't get to put impressive renderings in Architecture Digest, but I get to work with actual humans instead of corporate boards. I get to create spaces where people will laugh and cry and raise their kids and grow old." He glanced at her. "Sometimes running away and running toward are the same thing. You just have to find the right direction." Phoebe felt something shift in her chest, a tightening that wasn't quite emotion, but wasn't quite logical either. This stranger understood something about her that most people in her life didn't. Maybe because he'd experienced it himself. Maybe because he'd had the courage to make the choice she was still afraid to make. "The Boston job," she said slowly. "It's supposed to be everything I wanted. Prestigious press, great authors, room to grow. But sitting in that interview this morning, right before my mum called, I was terrified. Not nervous, terrified. Like I was about to commit to something that would lock me into a life I'm not sure I want." "Did you tell them that?" "Heavens, no. I told them I was passionate about literary fiction and excited about the opportunity and all the things you're supposed to say in an interview. But it wasn't true. It was partly true. That's what makes it so confusing." Phoebe rubbed her temples. "I do love books. I do love helping authors make their work better. But I also love sleeping past 6 a.m. and having weekends and not waking up with anxiety attacks about submission deadlines." Gunnar was quiet for a moment, navigating around a truck that was taking up 2 lanes. Then he said, "My therapist told me something useful when I was trying to figure out whether to leave my job. She said to me, Don't ask what you want to do. Ask what kind of person you want to be. And that helped? Eventually. I realized I wanted to be the kind of person who goes home tired but satisfied, who helps people, who builds things that matter, even if they're small. That person wasn't designing strip malls. He looked at her again, just a quick glance before returning his eyes to the road. Who do you want to be, Phoebe Taylor? It was such a simple question. It shouldn't have hit her like a punch to the gut. Who did she want to be? She opened her mouth to answer and found she didn't know. They drove in silence for a while, the kind of comfortable silence that usually only exists between old friends. Buddy snored in the back seat. NPR played softly on the radio, something about climate policy that neither of them was really listening to, and Phoebe watched the city give way to highway, highway give way to airport signs. I think, she said finally, I want to be the kind of person who helps tell important stories. But maybe not in the way I thought. Maybe not in a corner office in Boston. Maybe not. And I want to be the kind of person who's there when her family needs her, even if it means blowing a job interview and probably her entire career trajectory. Sounds like you already are that person. Phoebe felt tears welling up. Exhaustion, stress, fear, something else she couldn't name. Then why do I feel like I'm failing at everything? Gunnar signaled for the airport exit. Because you're in the middle of it. When you're in the middle of a renovation, the house looks like a disaster. Walls torn down, wiring exposed, everything covered in dust. Clients always panic at that stage. They can't see what it's going to become. They can only see the mess. He pulled into the departure lane, finding a spot near Phoebe's airline. But the mess is necessary. You can't build something new without taking apart what was there before. The car stopped. Buddy woke up and immediately pressed his nose against the window, interested in all the people and luggage and chaos of airport drop-off. Gunnar got out and retrieved Phoebe's bag from the trunk. She joined him on the sidewalk, suddenly reluctant to say goodbye to this stranger who'd somehow become something more in the span of an hour. "Thank you," she said, "for the ride, for listening, for not making me feel crazy." "You're not crazy. You're just figuring things out." He smiled, and again Phoebe noticed how it reached his eyes, how genuine it seemed. "And thank you for letting me see what I was supposed to become." "What do you mean?" He held up his bag, the one she'd borrowed that morning. "The architectural portfolio you were carrying when we met, that was for my dream project, a community center in Denver for at-risk kids. I've been working on it for 2 years, trying to get funding, trying to get approval. This morning in my hotel, I almost gave up on it. It felt too hard, too risky." Gunnar looked at her directly. "But then this stranger called me about a luggage mix-up. And when I met her, she was in the middle of the hardest day of her life. Family emergency, blown interview, everything falling apart, and she was still kind, still polite, still thoughtful enough to apologize for the inconvenience to me." He gestured to Buddy, who was wagging his tail. "That reminded me why I wanted to build the community center in the first place. Because there are good people in the world having hard days, and they deserve spaces that support them. They deserve someone to believe in them when things fall apart." Phoebe felt her throat tighten. "I didn't do anything special. You treated a stranger with kindness when you could have been angry or dismissive. You trusted me enough to accept a ride when you could have said no. That's special. That matters." An airport security officer was walking toward them, about to tell them they couldn't stay parked at the curb. Gunnar saw him coming and quickly pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number?" he asked. "I'd like to know your father's okay, and maybe when things settle down, we could talk more about the whole running away, running toward thing." Phoebe rattled off her number, and Gunnar saved it with quick efficiency. The security officer was close to them now, waving his hand in a universal gesture of, "Move along." "Good luck, Phoebe Taylor," Gunnar said. "I hope everything works out." "Good luck with your community center. Good luck with finding your magic again." He got back in the car. Buddy pressed his face against the rear window, tongue hanging out in a doggy grin, And then they were pulling away, merging back into the traffic. And Phoebe was standing alone on the curb with her black roller bag and her yellow luggage tag and a phone number for a stranger who somehow understood her better than most people she'd known for years. She took a deep breath, grabbed her bag, and walked into the airport. The flight to Seattle was surprisingly easy to book. There was a seat available on a direct flight leaving in 2 hours. Phoebe paid the exorbitant last-minute fare without flinching. She'd figure out the money thing later. Right now, her father needed her. She made it through security, found her gate, and sat down in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs that populate every airport in America. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. No change yet, they're still running tests. Safe travels, honey. Another text, this one from Margaret Brooks. Good luck with your father. Let me know when you're ready to reschedule, and next time, bring your actual portfolio. M. Phoebe smiled despite herself. At least she hadn't completely destroyed that bridge. Her phone buzzed again. An unknown number. This is Gunnar. Buddy wanted me to tell you that you were his favorite person today. High praise from a dog who loves everyone. Safe travels. Phoebe typed back. Tell Buddy he was my favorite too, and thank you again for everything. The response came quickly. Anytime. Really. She stared at that word, really, and wondered what it meant. Was it just politeness? Or was it an invitation, a door left open for something she didn't yet know? The gate agent called for boarding. Phoebe stood, grabbed her bag, and joined the line. As she handed over her boarding pass, she caught her reflection in the window. A woman who looked tired, stressed, uncertain about everything, but also maybe, possibly, a little bit brave. The Seattle sky was its usual November grey when Phoebe's plane landed at SeaTac at 9 p.m. local time, 16 hours after she'd left the hotel that morning, though it felt like 16 years. She was exhausted, wrung out, running on nothing but bad coffee and airplane peanuts. But the moment she walked into the terminal and saw her mother waiting by baggage claim, something unknotted in her chest. Mom! I'd like to take a moment and pause. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Please show a kindness by clicking like and subscribe. It would help our channel so much. Let's continue our story. Her mother pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than usual. Miranda Taylor wasn't typically demonstrative. She was practical, efficient, always focused on what needed to be done next. But tonight, she held onto her daughter like she was afraid to let go. How is he? Phoebe asked when they finally separated. Stable. They're keeping him overnight for observation. Miranda's face was drawn, new lines visible around her eyes. They think it might be his heart. Won't know for sure until tomorrow's tests. They collected Phoebe's bag, the black roller bag that had started this whole strange day, and walked to the parking garage. The drive to Swedish Medical Center was quiet. Just the sound of rain on the windshield and the occasional swish of passing cars. Seattle rain, the kind that felt like being inside a cloud. I'm sorry about your interview, Miranda said finally. Don't be. It wasn't important. It was important to you. Phoebe watched the city lights blur through the wet window. Not as important as being here. Her father was asleep when they arrived, propped up in a hospital bed with monitors beeping softly around him. He looked smaller than Phoebe remembered, more fragile. Quinn Taylor had always seemed solid to her, built from the same practical materials as the things he fixed, steel and wire and steady competence. But now he looked like paper, thin and temporary. "Hi, Dad," she whispered, taking his hand. His eyes fluttered open. "Phoebe Bear, you didn't have to come." "Of course I came." "Your interview can be rescheduled. You can't." She squeezed his hand gently. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone's been using my chest as a drum practice pad." He smiled weakly. "But I'm all right. They're taking good care of me. They sat together for a while, Phoebe and her mother, keeping vigil in the way families do, mostly silent, occasionally talking about nothing important, just being present. Around midnight, a nurse came in and suggested they go home, get some rest. They'd call if anything changed. Miranda drove Phoebe back to her apartment in Capitol Hill, the small one-bedroom she shared with a roommate who was apparently moving out, though Phoebe had been so busy she'd barely processed that information. The apartment was dark and silent. Phoebe dropped her bags by the door and collapsed onto her bed, still fully clothed. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Gunnar. "Hope your father's okay." Phoebe typed back with exhausted fingers. "Stable. More tests tomorrow. Thanks for checking. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." Phoebe fell asleep still holding her phone, still wearing her interview clothes, still thinking about a stranger with kind eyes who'd driven her to the airport and somehow made the worst day of her life feel slightly less impossible. The next week passed in a blur of hospital visits, hushed conversations with doctors, insurance forms, and too much terrible cafeteria coffee. Phoebe's father had experienced what the cardiologist called an episode, not quite a heart attack, but a warning sign that couldn't be ignored. They put him on medication, scheduled follow-up appointments, and recommended significant lifestyle changes. "You're going to have to actually retire now," Phoebe told him on the third day, sitting in his hospital room while he picked at a sodium-restricted lunch. "No more consulting work, no more just helping out a friend with a quick fix. I'm not even 65 yet. Dad, your heart is literally telling you to slow down." He sighed, pushing away his tray. "What am I supposed to do? Sit around the house watching game shows? You could take up hobbies, travel, spend time with Mum. Do all the things you've been putting off because you were too busy fixing everyone else's problems." Quinn looked at his daughter for a long moment. "Is that what you think I've been doing? Putting off my life? Haven't you?" "Maybe." He leaned back against his pillows. "But sometimes fixing things is my life. It's how I understand the world. When something's broken and I make it work again, that feels meaningful to me." Phoebe understood that more than she wanted to admit. Wasn't that why she became an editor? To take broken stories and help them work. "Then find things to fix that won't kill you," she said. "Volunteer to teach engineering to kids. Help Habitat for Humanity build houses. Just don't fix things that come with this much stress." Her father nodded slowly. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably when I watched my father almost die and realized life's too short to waste on things that don't matter." That evening, sitting in her apartment alone, her roommate had already moved out, taking half the furniture with her. Phoebe finally opened her laptop and checked her work email. 200 unread messages, 3 urgent flags from her boss, a calendar full of missed meetings. She stared at the screen for a long time, then she opened a new email to Margaret Brooks. "Dear Margaret, thank you for your patience and understanding last week. My father is stable and recovering, which is a relief beyond measure. I've been doing a lot of thinking since our interview, or attempted interview. I need to be honest with you about something. I'm not sure I'm the right fit for Brooks and Hamilton. It's not your company. You're doing exactly the kind of work I admire, but I'm realizing I might need to rebuild my relationship with editing before I can commit to a senior position at a prestigious press. I've lost touch with why I loved books in the first place, and I think I need to find that again before I can help other people tell their stories effectively. This isn't a withdrawal from consideration, it's a request for time. Would you be willing to keep the door open for a few months while I figure out what kind of editor I want to be? I understand if that's not possible, and I'm grateful either way for the opportunity. Sincerely, Phoebe Taylor." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Her phone buzzed, a text from Gunnar. They'd been texting sporadically throughout the week, brief check-ins that had somehow become the most grounding part of Phoebe's chaotic days. "How's your father doing?" Better. They're releasing him tomorrow. How's the community center project? Got preliminary approval from the city today. Still a long way to go, but it's progress. That's wonderful. Thanks. Hey, random question. Do you ever get out to Denver? Phoebe stared at that message for a long time. It was just a question. It didn't mean anything. Except it did mean something, or it could, if she let it. Not usually. Why? Just thinking it would be nice to continue that conversation about running away versus running toward. Without the urgency of airport security looming over us. Are you asking me to visit Denver? I'm suggesting that if you ever found yourself in Denver, I'd be happy to show you around. Maybe introduce you to Buddy. He hasn't stopped talking about you. Phoebe smiled, feeling something warm unfold in her chest. Something that wasn't anxiety or stress or the weight of too many responsibilities. Something that felt almost like hope. I've never been to Denver. It's a great city. Mountains, sunshine, architecture, golden retrievers. You make a compelling case. That's my job. Convincing people to take chances on things they're not sure about yet. Phoebe looked around her half-empty apartment, thought about the email she'd just sent, about her father in his hospital bed talking about what makes life meaningful, about the luggage mix-up that had somehow led to this moment, texting with a stranger who was becoming something more. What if I came next month, after things settle down here? The response came quickly. I'd love that. Really? There was that word again, really. And this time Phoebe understood what it meant. It meant the door wasn't just open, it was welcoming. It meant Gunnar Nelson from Denver was as curious about this unexpected connection as she was. Really? She typed back. Phoebe's father came home the next day with a list of medications, a strict diet plan, and a look of resignation that made her mother laugh. He's a terrible patient, Miranda told Phoebe in the kitchen, while Quinn napped on the couch. He's already trying to negotiate about the salt restriction. Let him negotiate, as long as he follows the restrictions. That's what the cardiologist said. Miranda poured them both tea, the fancy jasmine kind she saved for special occasions. So, tell me about Boston. There's not much to tell. I barely made it to the interview before you called. But you made it and then you left. Margaret Brooks emailed me, you know. Phoebe blinked. She what? I'm on the board of Seattle Arts and Lectures. Margaret and I know each other from various publishing events. She said you'd asked for time to figure things out. She also said she was impressed by your honesty. I basically told her I was having a quarter-life crisis and didn't know if I wanted the job. She said you told her you needed to rebuild your relationship with editing. That's not a crisis, that's self-awareness. Miranda set down her teacup and looked at her daughter with an expression Phoebe couldn't quite read. You know, I was an English teacher for 30 years before I retired. And every single year, I had students who thought they knew exactly what they wanted to do with their lives. Most of them were wrong. Thanks, Mom. Very encouraging. Let me finish. They were wrong because they'd fallen in love with an idea of something rather than the thing itself. Like your friend from college. What was her name? Amy. Who wanted to be a marine biologist because she liked dolphins and ended up hating the actual job. Because swimming with dolphins and collecting water samples at 4 a.m. in freezing ocean water are very different things. Miranda smiled. The students who ended up happy were the ones who were willing to admit when their dreams needed revision, when the job they'd imagined didn't match who they were becoming. Phoebe traced the rim of her teacup. Do you think I'm wrong to step back from the Boston job? I think you're smart to pause and question whether it's what you really want, but I also think you shouldn't confuse being burned out with being on the wrong path. Sometimes you just need rest, not a complete course correction. How do you know the difference? You don't always. That's why it's called figuring it out. Miranda reached across the table and squeezed Phoebe's hand. But you've got time. You're 30, not 90. You're allowed to experiment. That evening, after her parents were settled for the night, Phoebe sat in her apartment and pulled out her laptop. She opened a document she'd been ignoring for months, a manuscript from a first-time novelist she'd been trying to decide whether to recommend for acquisition. She'd read the first 50 pages back in September and had been unable to form an opinion. The writing was rough but promising. The story was familiar, but told with an unusual perspective. It could be great with the right editorial guidance, or it could be a time sink that went nowhere. Phoebe started reading from the beginning, this time without her mental checklist, without thinking about marketability or acquisition meetings or whether she could explain the book in 30 seconds. She just read, and somewhere around page 75, she felt that old spark. The one she'd had in college, staying up too late eating stale crackers, discovering treasure in the slush pile. The character made a choice that surprised her. The prose achieved something beautiful. The story opened up into something larger than its parts. This was why she'd become an editor. Phoebe read until 2 a.m., then sent an email to the author, a woman in Portland she'd never met, asking if she was open to editorial feedback. The kind of detailed, hands-on editing that wasn't technically part of Phoebe's job, but that she missed doing anyway. The response came the next morning. "Yes, please. I've been hoping someone would see the potential in this story." Over the next 3 weeks, Phoebe fell into a new rhythm. Days, she helped her parents navigate the maze of cardiac care, driving her father to appointments, helping her mother understand medication schedules, researching heart-healthy recipes that didn't taste like cardboard. Evenings, she worked on the manuscript, writing detailed editorial notes, having long phone conversations with the author about character motivation and plot structure, and the difference between showing and telling. She was working more hours than she had at her day job, but she felt more alive than she had in years. She also texted Gunnar nearly every day, not long conversations, just brief exchanges about their days, photos of Buddy doing cute things, questions about books and buildings, and what makes something worth building. Their messages had a rhythm to them, a back and forth that felt natural, like they'd known each other much longer than 3 weeks. "Question," Gunnar texted one evening. "When you edit a book, how do you know when to push the author to change something versus accept their vision?" "That's a surprisingly complicated question," Phoebe typed back. "Why?" "I'm dealing with something similar with my community center. The city wants me to change the design to be more practical, but I think practical would kill what makes it special." What makes it special? Light. Open space. Places for kids to just exist, without being told what to do. The city wants more structured activity rooms and fewer wasted spaces. Phoebe thought about this. "Here's what I do with authors. I distinguish between problems and solutions. If something isn't working in the story, that's a problem we both need to acknowledge. But the solution is usually up to the author. Maybe the city is identifying real problems, safety concerns, practical limitations, but that doesn't mean their solutions are the only ones. That's really helpful, actually. Thank you. Anytime. Really." There was that word again, passed back and forth between them like a talisman. The next day, Phoebe had lunch with Andi, her best friend who worked in tech marketing and had opinions about everything. They met at their usual spot, a Thai place on Capitol Hill that made curry that could clear your sinuses. "So," Andi said, dumping extra spice into her pad thai, "are you going to tell me about him, or do I have to torture it out of you?" "Tell you about who?" "The guy who's making you check your phone every 5 minutes. The one who puts that stupid smile on your face when you read texts." Phoebe felt her cheeks warm. "We're just friends. We met through a luggage mix-up. Romantic comedy meet. Cute. Got it. It's not a romantic comedy. It's just, he's a nice guy. We've been talking. You're going to Denver to visit him next month." "How do you know that?" "You mentioned it 3 times in the past week. Also, you've been Googling things to do in Denver." Andi grinned. "I'm not saying you have to marry him. I'm saying it's okay to admit you like him." Phoebe stabbed at her curry. I barely know him. So get to know him. That's literally what dating is. We're not dating. I'm just visiting, as friends. Right. Friends who text each other constantly and make each other smile. Just friends. Andi's expression softened. Look, I'm happy for you, even if you're being weird and defensive about it. You deserve something good after the month you've had. What if it's just, I don't know, crisis bonding? Like, we met during this terrible day, and my brain is connecting him with being rescued from the chaos. Does it matter? Even if that's how it started, it doesn't mean it's not real now. Andi leaned forward. Here's the thing about you, Phoebe. You overthink everything. You need to have every answer figured out before you'll take a single step. But sometimes you just have to jump and figure out the answers while you're falling. That's terrifying advice. That's life advice. When Phoebe got home that evening, she found an email from Margaret Brooks waiting for her. Phoebe, I wanted to reach out and see how you're doing. Your mother mentioned your father is recovering well, which is wonderful news. I've been thinking about your request for time, and I want you to know the door is absolutely open. In fact, I have a proposal for you. One of our authors, Celeste Hammond, is working on her second novel. She needs a developmental editor, someone to help her dig deep into structure and character while preserving her unique voice. The timeline is flexible, the work is entirely remote, and it would be contract-based rather than a full-time position. I thought of you immediately. From what I saw in our brief meeting, you have exactly the sensitivity and insight Celeste needs, and it might give you a chance to reconnect with editing on your own terms without the pressure of a full-time role. Would you be interested in discussing this? Best, Margaret. Phoebe read the email 3 times. Celeste Hammond. She knew that name, a novelist who'd won the National Book Award a decade ago and then went silent. Her comeback novel would be major. This wasn't the job Phoebe had interviewed for. It wasn't what she'd thought she wanted, but it was exactly what she needed, a chance to do the work she loved without the institutional pressure that had been crushing her. She replied, "Yes, let's talk." That night, she called Gunnar instead of texting. "Hey," he answered, sounding genuinely pleased. "This is a nice surprise." "I have news," Phoebe said. "Good news, I think." She told him about Margaret's offer, about the manuscript she'd been editing for the Portland author, about her conversation with Andi, about how she was starting to see a different path forward, one she hadn't been able to imagine a month ago. "That's wonderful," Gunnar said when she finished. "It sounds like you're building something." "I guess I am. It just doesn't look like what I thought it would look like." The best buildings never do. You start with blueprints, but then you have to adapt to the actual site, the actual materials, the way light actually falls through the windows. The final structure is always a collaboration between vision and reality. Is that what your community center is like? Yeah. The city finally approved a modified design yesterday. It's not exactly what I originally drew up, but it's better in some ways, more grounded, more possible. They talked for an hour about her father's recovery, about Buddy's latest antics, about the book Phoebe was reading, and the buildings Gunnar admired. It was the longest conversation they'd had since meeting, and it flowed as easily as their texts, maybe easier. "So," Gunnar said finally, "are you still planning to visit next month? If the offer still stands." "It absolutely stands. Buddy's already preparing his welcome committee. He's very thorough." Phoebe laughed. "Just Buddy." A pause, then quietly, "Not just Buddy." Phoebe's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Then yes, I'm coming to Denver." "I'm glad." After they hung up, Phoebe sat in her apartment for a long time, listening to the rain on the windows and thinking about foundations. How you couldn't build anything lasting on shaky ground. How sometimes you had to tear things down to their studs before you could rebuild them properly. How sometimes the best structures emerged from ruins. Denver in December was nothing like Seattle. Where Seattle was grey and damp, Denver was brilliant. Blue skies so sharp they looked painted. Sunshine that actually felt warm despite the cold air, and mountains rising to the west like a promise. Phoebe's plane descended over the city on a Tuesday morning, and she pressed her face to the window like a child, taking in the geometric sprawl of neighborhoods, the snake of the South Platte River, the downtown skyscrapers catching light. Gunnar was waiting at baggage claim, Buddy at his side, wearing his service dog vest. When Phoebe came down the escalator, pulling her black roller bag with its yellow tag, Gunnar smiled that same open smile she remembered from Boston. "Welcome to Denver," he said. "Thanks for picking me up." Buddy insisted. The dog wagged his entire body, and Phoebe knelt to greet him properly. Buddy responded by trying to lick every inch of her face, tail whipping back and forth with pure joy. "He's been talking about this all week," Gunnar said. "Just him." Gunnar met her eyes. Not just him. They collected her bag and walked to the parking garage, falling into easy conversation about her flight, the weather, whether Phoebe had ever experienced altitude before. "You'll want to drink lots of water," Gunnar advised. "The air here is thin and dry. Most people don't realize until they wake up with a headache." The drive from the airport took them through downtown and into a neighborhood called Park Hill. Tree-lined streets, bungalow-style houses, the kind of area that felt both urban and suburban at once. Gunnar pulled up in front of a small house with a front porch and a yard where a golden retriever-shaped hole had been dug under one of the bushes. "Buddy's work," Gunnar said, following her gaze. "He's convinced there's treasure under there." "Is there?" "Just rocks and disappointment, but he's an optimist." Gunnar's house was exactly what Phoebe had expected, and nothing like she'd imagined. The outside was modest, a 1920s bungalow that had probably housed working-class families for decades. But inside it had been transformed with obvious care. Exposed brick walls, original hardwood floors, refinished to a warm glow. Built-in bookshelves that looked like they'd been there forever, but probably hadn't. The furniture was mismatched, but comfortable, the kind of pieces you collected over time rather than bought as a set. "This is beautiful," Phoebe said, taking it all in. "Thanks. It's been a 5-year project. I bought it as a disaster and slowly brought it back." He gestured to the living room. That wall was actually 3 small rooms. The kitchen was stuck in 1973. The bathroom had carpet. "Carpet in a bathroom?" "I know, hey? It was a crime against both hygiene and aesthetics." Gunnar set down her bag. "I've got you set up in the guest room. It's small, but it has an actual bed instead of an air mattress, so that's something. I appreciate any bed that isn't an air mattress." He showed her to the guest room, painted a soft grey, with a comfortable-looking bed and a window overlooking the backyard. It was simple but welcoming, the kind of space that invited you to rest. "Take your time settling in," Gunnar said. "I thought we could grab lunch in a bit, let you adjust to the altitude before doing anything ambitious." But when Phoebe came out of the guest room 20 minutes later, she found Gunnar in his kitchen, making sandwiches, turkey, and Swiss on sourdough, just like the sandwich she'd eaten in the Denver airport a month ago. He noticed her noticing. "I remembered," he said simply. They ate on the front porch despite the cold, bundled in jackets, and watched Buddy explore the yard with the dedication of a scientist conducting field research. The sun was warm on Phoebe's face, the sky impossibly blue, and for the first time in weeks, she felt herself relax completely. "So," Gunnar said, "how's your dad doing?" "Really well, actually. He's driving my mum crazy by insisting he can still help his friends with small projects. But he's following his diet and taking his medication, and he's started teaching a basic engineering class at the community college." "That's great." "He's thriving, actually. Turns out retirement was exactly what he needed. He just needed it to be reframed as teaching the next generation instead of giving up." Gunnar nodded. "People need purpose. It's not enough to just stop doing the thing that was killing you. You need to find something life-giving to do instead." Is that what the community center is for you? Yeah. He took a bite of his sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. I spent so many years designing buildings that served corporate interests or investor returns. The community center is the first project where the only question is, will this help people? Everything else is secondary. When do you start construction? Hopefully February if all the permits come through. I'm terrified and excited in equal measure. He looked at her. Kind of like you flying out here. Phoebe felt her cheeks warm. Was I that obvious? You texted me 3 times yesterday to confirm your flight details, which I already knew because you'd texted them to me twice before. I was nervous. About what? Phoebe set down her sandwich. This was the moment for honesty, the kind of vulnerable truth-telling that either deepened connections or destroyed them. She could deflect, make a joke, keep things light and safe. Or she could jump, like Andi had advised, and figure out the answers while falling. About whether this thing between us is real, or if I just invented it because you were kind to me on the worst day of my life, she said quietly. About whether I'm reading too much into text messages and one car ride. About whether I'm being completely insane by flying to Denver to visit someone I've met exactly twice. Gunnar was quiet for a long moment. Buddy came over and put his head on Phoebe's knee, as if sensing she needed support. You want to know what I think? Gunnar finally said. I think human connection is weird and unpredictable and doesn't follow any logical rules. I think sometimes you meet someone at exactly the wrong time and it becomes exactly the right thing. I think our luggage mix-up was absurd, and my driving you to the airport was impulsive, and us texting for a month straight was unexpected. He reached over and took her hand. But I also think some of the best things in life are absurd and impulsive and unexpected, and I'm really glad you're here, Phoebe Taylor, even if we're both a little crazy. Phoebe laughed, feeling something tight in her chest loosen. We're definitely a little crazy. Well, you did steal my luggage. You participated in the theft by not immediately calling the airline. I was being a good Samaritan. You were being curious about the woman who'd packed 3 backup interview outfits. Gunnar grinned. Can you blame me? Anyone that prepared is either brilliant or anxious. I was betting on both. They finished lunch and spent the afternoon walking around Park Hill, Gunnar pointing out houses he'd worked on, architectural details he loved, small businesses he frequented. Buddy trotted beside them, stopping occasionally to greet other dogs or investigate interesting smells. The air was cold, but the sun was warm, and Phoebe found herself thinking about her conversation with her mother, about the difference between being on the wrong path and just needing rest. This felt like rest. Not in the sense of doing nothing, but in the sense of being fully present without the weight of anxiety pressing down on her shoulders. For the first time in months, maybe years, she wasn't mentally cataloguing everything she should be doing instead of what she was doing. She was just here, walking next to Gunnar, listening to him talk about load-bearing walls and original windows and the way good design served human needs rather than just aesthetic preferences. That evening, Gunnar made dinner: roasted chicken, vegetables, rice cooked with butter and herbs. They ate in his kitchen at a table he'd built himself, with Buddy lying nearby in a patch of last light from the window. Tell me about the Celeste Hammond project, Gunnar said. How's that going? Phoebe had started working with Celeste 2 weeks earlier, exchanging long emails about the structure of her novel, the way memory shapes narrative, whether certain scenes needed to be shown in real time or reflected upon. It was challenging work. Celeste was brilliant, but also stubborn, protective of her vision even when it wasn't quite working. It's hard, Phoebe admitted. She's used to being celebrated as a genius, and I'm having to tell her that her first draft has problems. Real structural problems that can't just be polished away. How's she taking it? Better than I expected, actually. I think she knows something's not working. She just needed someone to help her see what it was. Phoebe speared a piece of chicken. It's reminding me why I became an editor. not to tell authors what to write, but to help them see their own stories more clearly. That's like what I do with renovation clients. They know they want something different, but they can't always articulate what. My job is to listen to what they're not saying and translate it into design. Do you ever get it wrong? All the time. But that's why I do mock-ups and 3D renderings before we start demolition. Give people a chance to say, wait, that's not what I meant, before we knock down any walls. They talked until late about work, about families, about the strange path that had led them both to this moment. At some point, Gunnar opened a bottle of wine, and they migrated to the living room, sitting on his comfortable couch while Buddy snored in his dog bed. The conversation flowed the way their texts had, easy and natural, jumping from serious to silly and back again. "Can I ask you something?" Gunnar said around 11 p.m, when they were both slightly wine-drunk and honest in that way wine encourages. "Sure. Are you happy with the choices you've made? The stepping back from the Boston job, the freelance editing, all of it?" Phoebe considered this. A month ago, she would have said no, or maybe, or I'm not sure yet. But now, sitting in Gunnar's living room with Buddy snoring nearby and the remains of a good meal on the kitchen table, she realized the answer had shifted. "Yeah," she said, "I think I am. It's not what I planned, but it's better than what I planned. More flexible, more human-sized." Human-sized, I like that. "What about you? Are you happy?" Gunnar looked at her, and something in his expression made Phoebe's breath catch. "I'm getting there, this week especially." The air between them changed, became charged with possibility. Phoebe knew if she leaned forward, if she closed the small distance between them on the couch, something would shift irreversibly. They'd cross from maybe to definitely, from potential to actual. She leaned forward. Gunnar met her halfway. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. It tasted like wine and hope and all the vulnerable honesty they'd been building toward for the past month. When they pulled apart, Gunnar was smiling. "So," he said, "not just friends?" "Definitely not just friends." "Good. Buddy will be thrilled. He's been rooting for us." Phoebe laughed and kissed him again, and this time it was less tentative, more certain. Outside, Denver sparkled under its big sky. Inside, two people who'd met through chaos and confusion and a mix-up with identical luggage were building something neither of them had planned, but both of them wanted. Phoebe spent 5 days in Denver, and each day felt like a small revelation. They toured the site for Gunnar's community center, still just an empty lot with survey stakes. But Gunnar walked her through his vision, gesturing to empty air as he described where the windows would be, how the light would fall, the way the space would invite people in rather than intimidate them. They visited art galleries and bookstores, and a restaurant that served the best green chili Phoebe had ever tasted. They took Buddy to a dog park where he made friends with every single dog, democratically distributing his affection, and they talked endlessly about everything. On the third day, curled up on Gunnar's couch after dinner, Phoebe asked him about his family. He got quiet for a moment, then told her about his parents' divorce when he was 12, the way it had made him think carefully about what made spaces feel safe versus merely functional. "I spent so many years shuttling between two houses that never quite felt like home," he said. "I think that's why I became obsessed with creating spaces that feel welcoming. I wanted to build what I'd been missing." Phoebe told him about growing up as an only child, about the pressure she'd felt to be perfect, to justify her parents' immigration and sacrifice with some kind of impressive American success story. "I thought that meant prestigious career, important job, all the external markers. But my dad almost dying made me realize none of that matters if you're miserable. Better to be happy and small than impressive and hollow." "You're not small," Gunnar said, pulling her closer. "You're human-sized, remember?" On the fourth day, they video-called Andi, who took one look at them sitting together on Gunnar's couch and said, "Oh, thank heavens, you're being normal about this now instead of weird and defensive." I was never weird and defensive, Phoebe protested. You absolutely were, but I forgive you because he seems great. Andi addressed Gunnar directly. Hi, I'm Andi, Phoebe's best friend in quality control. Quick questionnaire. Do you have any secret families, criminal records, plans to join a cult? No, no, and no. Excellent. Do you make Phoebe laugh? I try. Does Buddy approve? At the sound of his name, Buddy pushed his way into frame, tail wagging. I'll take that as a yes, Andi said. Okay, you pass. Phoebe, he's a keeper. Don't screw this up by overthinking it. After they hung up, Gunnar said, I like her. She's the best, also slightly terrifying. The best people usually are. That night, lying in Gunnar's guest room, they decided to take physical things slowly. Despite the chemistry between them, Phoebe couldn't sleep. Her mind kept spinning, but for once it wasn't anxiety, it was possibility. She pulled out her phone and started writing an email to Margaret Brooks. Margaret, Celeste and I made a breakthrough today. She's agreed to restructure the entire second act, which I know sounds drastic, but it's going to make the novel so much stronger. Working with her has reminded me why I became an editor, that moment when you help someone see what their story could be. I wanted to let you know I'm interested in discussing a longer-term arrangement with Brooks and Hamilton. Not the senior editor position. I don't think I'm ready for that level of responsibility yet, but if you need contract editors for developmental work, I'd love to be someone you call. I'm also staying in Seattle for the foreseeable future. My father's recovery is going well, but I want to be close to my family. I think I can do my best work when I'm not constantly anxious about the people I love. Thank you for your patience while I figured this out, and thank you for the Celeste project. It's been exactly what I needed. Best, Phoebe. She hit send and set down her phone, feeling lighter. She'd made a choice. Not the choice she'd planned a year ago or even 2 months ago, but a choice that felt right for who she was becoming. Her phone buzzed. A text from Gunnar from the bedroom next door. You still awake? Yeah, just sent an important email. Good important or scary important? Both. The best kind. Want to talk about it? Phoebe smiled. She could hear Buddy's snoring through the wall, a comforting sound that meant a good dog was sleeping peacefully nearby. She could feel the weight of the choices she'd made, scary but solid, uncertain but true. Tomorrow. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Along with everything else. There's a lot of everything else. I know I'm looking forward to it. Me too. Good night, Phoebe Taylor. Good night, Gunnar Nelson. On her last day in Denver, Gunnar took her to Red Rocks Amphitheater, the famous concert venue built into natural rock formations. They hiked the trails around it, Buddy leading the way, and stopped at the top to look out over the city sprawling below and the mountains rising beyond. I need to tell you something, Phoebe said, sitting on a rock with Buddy's head in her lap. Gunnar sat beside her. Okay. I'm falling for you, fast and hard, and probably not wisely, and it terrifies me because we live in different cities, and we've known each other for 5 weeks, and this should be way too soon to feel this certain about someone. She took a breath. But I do feel certain, and I wanted you to know. Gunnar was quiet for a moment, looking out at the view. Then he said, I'm falling for you too, and you're right, it's fast, and probably not wise. But I don't care about the timeline. I care about how I feel when I'm with you. How do you feel? Like I can be completely honest. Like I don't have to perform or impress or pretend. Like you see me, the person I actually am, instead of the person I think I should be. He turned to face her. And I think I see you too. The real you. The one who's brilliant and anxious and kind and brave enough to blow up her life when it wasn't working. Phoebe felt tears pricking her eyes. We live 800 miles apart. Seattle has an airport, so does Denver, and I'm pretty sure they invented video calls specifically for situations like this. Long distance is hard. Most things worth doing are hard. Gunnar took her hand. But here's what I know. I spent 5 years at a job that made me miserable because I was too scared to quit. I almost gave up on my community center because it seemed impossible. And then you called me about a luggage mix-up, and something about that conversation, about your honesty, your willingness to ask for help, made me think maybe impossible things were worth attempting. He squeezed her hand. I'm not saying this will be easy. I'm saying I want to try if you want to try. Phoebe looked at him, this man she'd met a month ago in the chaos of the worst day of her life. This stranger who'd driven her to the airport without hesitation, who'd texted her for weeks, who'd welcomed her into his home and his life with open hands. This architect who built spaces for human connection, who believed that things could be transformed if you were willing to put in the work. I want to try, she said. They kissed there on the rocks, with Buddy wagging his tail nearby, and the mountains watching, and the city spreading out below them like a promise of all the life still waiting to be lived. The thing about airports is that they're both endings and beginnings, places where you say goodbye and hello in the same breath. Phoebe had learned this over the past year, spending more time in airports than any human should reasonably endure. Seattle to Denver, Denver to Seattle, sometimes stopping in between for work. She'd traveled to New York 3 times to meet with Celeste, to Boston twice for meetings with Margaret Brooks, to Portland once to have coffee with that author she'd been editing, who was now her first officially agented client. She'd become an airport expert. Best coffee shops. Starbucks was reliable but soulless. Local places were always better. Optimal carry-on size, slightly larger than airlines claimed was acceptable. The crucial importance of good noise-cancelling headphones. She could sleep on planes now, a skill she'd never possessed before, but had developed out of sheer necessity. But this time, walking through SeaTac on a November morning, exactly 1 year after the luggage mix-up that had changed everything, Phoebe wasn't heading out. She was waiting for someone to arrive. She stood at baggage claim, watching travelers stream down the escalator, pulling their identical black roller bags behind them. She smiled, remembering her own confusion a year ago, the panic when she'd realized she had someone else's luggage, the phone call that had started everything. And then she saw Gunnar descending the escalator with Buddy at his side, no longer just visiting, no longer just passing through, coming to stay. "Hey," he said when he reached her, that familiar smile spreading across his face. "Hey yourself." She hugged him, breathing in the scent that had become familiar. Soap and coffee, and something essentially him. Buddy wagged his entire body, pushing between them to demand attention from both. How was the flight? Long but fine. Buddy charmed everyone in first class. One woman tried to adopt him. He has that effect on people. They collected Gunnar's bags, 2 this time, plus several boxes he'd shipped ahead. He was moving to Seattle. Not permanently, not giving up Denver entirely, but establishing a satellite office here, taking on projects in the Pacific Northwest, building a life that spanned both places, because the woman he loved was here. And he'd discovered that love was more important than geographic convenience. Phoebe had made her own compromises. She was still freelancing, but had taken on more steady work with Brooks and Hamilton. Enough that Margaret had joked about needing to give Phoebe an actual title. She traveled to Denver every month, sometimes twice a month, staying with Gunnar in his beautiful renovated bungalow and working on his couch while Buddy snored at her feet. They'd figured out long distance the way people figured out anything difficult, through trial and error, through honest conversations, through a willingness to be flexible and creative, and occasionally ridiculous. They'd had fights about schedules and misunderstandings over text and moments of frustration when they just wanted to be in the same place at the same time. But they'd also had beautiful weekends in both cities, had learned each other's rhythms and needs, had built something sturdy even across the distance. And now they were trying something new, something scary, something that felt right. "How's your dad?" Gunnar asked as they walked to Phoebe's car. She'd finally gotten it fixed, replacing the bad transmission that had been limping along for years. Great. He and Mom are actually here. They wanted to help with your move. Also, my mom has been cooking for 3 days straight. I hope you're hungry. Always. They drove to Phoebe's apartment, no longer the half-empty place she'd had a year ago. She'd found a new roommate, a woman named Jules, who worked in software and was gone most weekends rock climbing. The apartment felt like home now, filled with books and comfortable furniture. And soon a man and his dog, who were bringing their own kind of light into her life. Nervous? Phoebe asked as they pulled into her parking spot. Terrified, Gunnar admitted, but the good kind of terrified, the kind that means you're doing something that matters. That's how I felt flying to Denver last year. How'd that turn out? Phoebe leaned over and kissed him. Pretty well, I think. Inside the apartment, Miranda and Quinn were indeed there, laying out enough food to feed an army. Quinn was moving more slowly than he used to, but was otherwise healthy, his heart stable, his retirement filled with teaching and small projects, and the kind of balance Phoebe had worried he'd never find. Miranda immediately folded Gunnar into a hug. "Welcome," she said. "We're so glad you're here. Thank you for having me and for the incredible smelling food. Mama Taylor's specialty," Quinn said, shaking Gunnar's hand. "Hope you're ready for some serious eating." They spent the afternoon settling Gunnar in. Phoebe had cleared half her closet for his clothes, made space in the bathroom for his toiletries, created a little office area where he could work when he wasn't at client sites. Buddy immediately claimed the sunniest spot in the living room, circling 3 times before flopping down with a contented sigh. "He approves," Gunnar said. "Good, because I'm pretty attached to him." "Just him?" "Maybe not just him." That evening, after Phoebe's parents had left and they'd finished unpacking the essentials, Gunnar pulled out a folder from one of his boxes. "I wanted to show you something." Inside were architectural drawings, elevations, and floor plans for a building Phoebe didn't recognize. "What is this?" "The Seattle branch of the community center. I've been working on it for a few months, getting permits, talking to potential partners. The Denver one is almost built, and it's going so well that I started thinking about expansion." He pointed to the plans. "This would be in the Central District, serving kids who need safe spaces, mentorship, support. Same philosophy as Denver, lots of light, open spaces, places to just exist, but adapted for Seattle's climate and community needs." Phoebe looked at the drawings, then at Gunnar. "You're really doing this, building something here." "I'm building a life here. The community center is part of that, but it's not the most important part." He set down the plans and took her hands. "You are. Us. Whatever we're creating together." Phoebe felt her throat tighten. "I love you. I don't think I've said that enough." "You've said it plenty, but I don't mind hearing it again." "I love you," she repeated. "And I'm so glad you grabbed the wrong luggage a year ago." "I'm pretty sure you grabbed the wrong luggage. We both made the same mistake, but I'm not sure it was a mistake anymore." Gunnar pulled her close. Definitely not a mistake. Outside, Seattle rain began to fall. The gentle, persistent kind that had driven Phoebe crazy when she first moved here, but that she'd come to love. Inside, Buddy snored in his sunny spot. Phoebe's phone buzzed with an email from Celeste Hammond, whose novel was scheduled to publish in the spring. The apartment smelled like Miranda's cooking, like home. A year ago, Phoebe had been running. From what, she wasn't entirely sure. Toward what, she couldn't have named. She'd been lost in a cloud of anxiety and expectations, trying to fit herself into a life that looked right on paper but felt wrong in her bones. And then she'd grabbed the wrong black roller bag, and then a stranger had driven her to the airport. And then they'd started texting, tentatively building something neither of them had planned, but both of them needed. She'd learned something in that year, that sometimes the best things in life emerge from chaos, that kindness from strangers can change everything, that being lost is just another word for being open to discovery. That luggage mix-ups and missed interviews and family emergencies, all the things that seem like disasters, might actually be the universe's clumsy way of redirecting you towards something better. Phoebe pulled back slightly to look at Gunnar. You know what's funny? What? If everything had gone according to plan last year, if I'd made that interview on time, if I'd gotten the Boston job, if my dad hadn't ended up in the hospital, we never would have met, or we would have met for 5 minutes at baggage claim, swapped bags, and forgotten about each other. I don't think I could have forgotten about you. You don't know that. We were both different people a year ago, stuck, scared to make changes. You would have handed me my bag, and I would have said thank you, and we would have walked away. Maybe, Gunnar conceded, but I prefer the timeline we got, even if it was messier. Me too. They stood there together in the middle of Phoebe's apartment, their apartment now, surrounded by moving boxes and building plans and all the beautiful mess of two lives merging into one. Outside, the rain fell. Inside, they were dry and warm and home. And somewhere in a Denver warehouse, a golden retriever-shaped hole had been dug under a bush, still waiting to yield its treasure. But Buddy had moved on to new adventures, new sunny spots to claim, new people to love with his whole heart. Because that's what you do when you're brave enough to leave what's familiar and build something new. You dig, you search, you stay optimistic even when all you find is rocks and disappointment. You keep wagging your tail. You believe that somewhere, somehow, there's treasure waiting to be discovered. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and brave and kind to strangers having the worst days of their lives, the treasure finds you. Phoebe kissed Gunnar again, and Buddy snored, and the rain kept falling, and somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, a plane was landing or taking off, carrying other people toward their own unexpected futures. Other black roller bags were being mixed up. Other strangers were meeting in moments of chaos. Other lives were being redirected toward joy. The universe was still messy and unpredictable, but Phoebe Taylor had learned to see that not as a problem, but as a promise. Because the best stories, the ones worth telling, worth living, worth editing into being, they were never the ones that went according to plan. They were the ones that surprised you.
Thank you for spending time with me. If this story moved you, share it. Someone else might need to hear it too. God bless you.